You don't know what you go into when you get into a community. It takes a year or something before you really know what's happening. And then you're part of it. So this all creates a rigidity, conservatism, even if you're a progressive movement. And it's a fact that if we have one of the reactions to ordinary democracy, which is consensus, then it is, as is used in, for instance, the Occupy movement or other progressive movements, it has a basic beauty to it because it basically respects everybody. But the problem is that if you have made a decision and you now have like 100 or 200 people making consensus on something, and it turns out half a year after that this wasn't all the best decision, then it's practically impossible to change the decision. And when this has happened for 20 years in a row, then you have a load of old decisions that are practically concrete. And then you see all the young people saying goodbye. So this is some of the things we want to change. So sociocracy is also given the name of dynamic governance because it has some very intense decisions about how to take out this concrete of the old systems. It's called governance because it's not only a decision-making system, it's a complete system that can control a whole organization. And it is scalable so that you can have it you can do it 2 persons, 10 persons, 200 persons. And in Holland, they have organizations of 2,000 or 3,000 people. And theoretically, we can do the whole world. But it will take some time, and it will also take some development of the system. But so it's governance. The decision is called consent, and as I said, it's a bit different from consensus. And just to say, one of the differences is that consensus has this conservatism to it, whereas consent has a definite rule that every decision has an expiry date. So they all die. All decisions have to be revised on a certain day, and then they will have to be taken out. Then we'll discuss and they will evaluate. And this is about feedback, because it makes a lot of change in the decision-making process that we don't have to agree on something that we know deep in our minds that we'll have to live with the rest of our lives. If we know that we may even say, if we can't agree on it, we can maybe agree on it for 3 months. Mm-hmm. And then we try it, and then 3 months, we are wiser. And then we take another decision. And then we move on, and then we get wiser. Instead of trying to predict everything. Because this is what happens in big groups when they are trying to predict the world. It creates fear, worry, and everybody gets all kinds of fantasies what can happen in the next 5 years. And so they try to figure out ways to control all these factors. And then they create a big decision, and then they are stuck with it for the next 5 years, or maybe for life. So the idea is to stop that. The opposite direction. Small decisions, small steps, evaluations, move on. And then cut the whole possibility of ever making a decision in common. So you keep the thing rolling. This consent process is one of the basic things. And then we have self-organizing circles. This is really new because consent is a refinement of consensus. It is a good refinement of consensus, but it's not the whole story, because what happens is that consent is only possible in rather small groups. So if you have a group that is much bigger than 40 people, then you need to do something, because it doesn't work there. It becomes unpractical. So the other part, let's say the sociocracy is two main contributions is a refined decision-making process that acknowledges that it only works in smaller groups. Even rather small groups, depending on how trained you are, you can say 12 people. But 40 people, that will take really disciplined, trained people and good facilitating. So, but the other part is how to break up a big organization into smaller parts, which is a different approach than ordinary democracy. Because there we say, if we want to make a decision with 1,000 people, then we have to make a proposal, and then we make a count, and then this is it. Because we realize that this is not possible to do as a consent decision or consensus decision with 1,000 people. And then we settle for a bad decision, which is not the idea. In sociocracy, we don't settle for a bad decision. What we do is something completely different. We break up the whole organization into small parts, and then we have a system to have these parts communicate. And what the interesting thing about the system was that it was invented, please get back to the person, it has been on its way in several generations, but the final version was by an electronic engineer who was able to design a system of control. How does power flow, how does information flow, and how do we avoid the things get shortcut? How do we avoid to get shortcuts and conflicts of the system? And it took some modern science of complicated systems to do that. And feedback loops, which is some of what I already mentioned. It is that we make small decisions, we go there, we get wiser, and then we feed back, and we take a new decision. And we are very aware that we need as much feedback as we get feed forward. So the power from a decision flows out into the system, and then there's collected exactly as much information the other way. And what you see in ordinary organizations is that people in power, if they sort of fuck up, then there's some criticism going on. And then very often you see people not wanting the feedback. And for an electronic engineer, he just says, this doesn't work. In any computer system or electronic system, or for that matter, biological system, you need 100% of the feedback. It needs to go back where it came from. And you don't even have any political opinion about this. It's just that it doesn't work if you don't get the full feedback. So this is a kind of a technical thinking that has created this. But so there's feedback loops that make sure that all information is fed out in decisions, through actions, and then feedback. Yes, and the inventor was Edinburgh, a Dutchman. As I said, it has some origins. Quakers have used a consensus system for many years, generations, I think. But the problem with their system is that it takes a lot of spiritual practice, and it takes a lot of discipline, and it takes a lot of time to get to the point where you have this kind of respect and openness to each other. And modern organizations don't work that way. You have people coming in and out, not even intentional communities, you have people coming in and out and they want influence right away. And you have to have structures that make sure that they come in and they get the picture and then they work. You can't expect them to have several years of personal development before they start working. So it has to be built into the system. So this was the Quaker consensus, and then there's the communication theory, chaos theory, and modern cybernetics. And this is what the electronics engineer brought into it. And cybernetics is the science of how to steer things, how to regulate things. And it goes for social systems, it goes for electronic systems, it goes for biological systems, ecosystems, and all that. It's all about how things work together, circles of information and things like that. So, and what he said, we want some values in this, we want harmony, but harmony is not one value. it is something that takes more voices, different voices. Some of the voices in this system says equivalence. We need, not all the time, but sometimes we need situations where everybody is equal. And then we need other situations where experts are allowed to flourish. So that sometimes people who are good at something, they have to have more influence on a certain question. But when we have a static system, then we say that people who are elected for a position, then they tend to collect more power than they are actually entitled to. So what we also have to have is this system of equivalence, where now and then we sit down and then we're equals. And then we decide how much power are you going to have. Is it okay that you as an accountant is doing the accountants? Yes, that's okay, but it's not okay that you are using more power than that. And we can discuss that in a position where you are not leader. So actually, sociocracy is a way to combine the advantages of leadership with the advantages of equivalence. It is not equivalent all the time. It lets, in the daily practices, lets qualified people do what they're best at and take the decisions they need to take without asking the whole group. And then transparency. This is about written rules and unwritten rules. The basic rule is that unwritten rules don't count. If you have a rule, unwritten rules don't count. Just like that. So if you want to have something be valid, you have to make a proposal and you have to have consent. So when you put in sociocracy, you can't expect anybody to do anything, basically. And then you create rules as you go. So we may decide that probably it's a good idea to speak the truth. And so on. But we do it as we go. That's transparency and then efficiency. And part of the efficiency is that the circle structure, we break up the whole organization in small circles, and then all the circles make their own rules. So they don't make rules for each other. So we don't have to agree on everything. We only have to agree with the group we're working with. So one thing, there's only a very few principles that we have to go through the whole organizations, and that's three or four principles. Right? I think they are more or less in the picture I had here. Consent decision, self-organizing circles, and feedback loops, and then the way the feedback loops are organized. These are the three things. It goes for a sociocratic organization. The rest of it is created as we go. And then there's a lot of science to how is this created in a qualified way. But you can do it in a lot of ways. And every circle can, in principle, do it the way they want. Yeah. And this is about feedback loops. And one thing we need to know is to make a common decision, we need to have a common aim. Unless we have, and that is acknowledged very clearly in sociocracy, that it doesn't make any sense to try and make agreement if we don't have a common aim. Just don't ever do it. Don't start the discussion because it's bound to fall apart into something frustrating. And we see that very often that we start, I want to discuss something, and then we have a discussion, and then maybe a decision, but it's typically not a good decision. So we have to have a common aim, and how to create a common aim is a very important part of this system. It's an important part of all systems, actually. So the part of this is not so revolutionary. And the part is more here that we make a system where every circle has its common aim, so that you can have a big organization with lots of aims, but each circle is working with one. You don't have to sit in the same circle all the time, but you know that when I'm sitting in this group, this is our aim. This is what we're talking about. So we have the aim, and then we have an idea, For instance, we want to create an ashram, or what was the word in, I forgot. Jagrati, yeah. Something we create or an eco-village or something, you create a community. And then you say, this is our common aim. And then we have to find out what does it look like, and we make a plan. And we make a plan, and then we feed it forward, and take some decisions, and implement them, and then we do something, and then we see if it works. And then we measure, which is the technical part of evaluating or estimating or something like that. But we say, does it actually work? Are we getting there? Very often you see politicians, they have a problem, and then they say, we have to do something about it. And then they do something about it, and then year after, they say, well, did it work? Well, this is not, we don't discuss this anymore. We have, for instance, we have summertime daylight saving. This has been happening for years. It doesn't work. It's making a lot of problems, but it's a bad habit.
Just, it's about to finish at 5 o'clock. It's okay for you?
5 o'clock?
Yeah, and then we have 15 minutes to the coffee break. Okay?
I'll try to finish it.
Yeah, 1 hour.
Okay. So I'll try to go a little faster. So to get things rolling, we need a fair and participatory decision-making process. Everybody needs to feel that they are heard, and we need a clear statement of vision, mission, and aim. These two things, we can say that it's interesting that people don't really care about them so much, because it's obvious that if you don't have these two, then you can have all kinds of ideas about what is important. But if you don't have an aim and you don't have a decision-making process, you're bound to have problems. So you can say whatever you do, whether it's an oil company or it's a permaculture garden, you start at the same place. You need these two.
Can I make a question? How do you see the difference between vision, mission, and aims?
Right now. Because, vision and aim. And vision means seeing something. And the idea is to look out in the world and see, or rather look out in our idea of the world and see what would it be like if we did our work, if we actually managed to do what we want to do. What is the change we want to bring about, and how does the world look like? The next thing is to look to ourselves and say, what is it we're doing? What kind of work are we doing? And how do we connect to this vision? Why do we do this work? And what is our reason to take responsibility for this work? Because we need to know that as well. But it's two different things. And to not discuss them in the same forum or under the same point of the agenda, it's a good idea, because usually you get into a discussion about what is most important. Both of them are very important. And one thing you will see is, and then the aim. Aim is a word for getting there, very exact. This is completely different than the vision, because you can always see the vision. It's all over there. Can you see that? It's very wide. The aim is down. Did we get it? Can we do it? Can we do this? What do we do first? And in 1 year, are we there? This is something more different. More, and this is measurable. It's something you can say, anybody can say, have we done it or have we not done it? This is not the vision. And this is the picture I often used to show this, is that the vision has to be wide. The wider the better, because we want to include as many people's dreams. It's the dreams that is powering people to feel identified with anything. So the vision, it needs to be wide. So if anybody contributes with a dream, we just put it up here, somewhere. And if there's no space for it, then we just make it wider. Right? So it's basically a brainstorm that is just loosely organized, but we have to have it complete so everybody feels that they are there with their unit. Then the mission is about what can we do, what kinds of work do we do. And then we narrow it into an aim, and then we say, what are we doing when? Or what are we doing first? And this is very, very important here. This is actually not sociocracy, but it's something I got from another tradition, but I just want to share it, is that one of the things you don't want to do is ask what is most important. Because basically, at this stage, it also means who is most important. This is about creating a power structure. And we want everybody in. So what we do when we narrow things in is to find out what do we do first. And then we say, with all the tasks we want to do, we say which task will, if it is done first, support the others.
What if all the tasks support others? How can you choose the first task?
You find, see how they relate, each of them, and then you find, if you have two of them, you say, does this one support this one? If this one goes first, will it support this one? Well, if it is, then it goes first. It's not because it's more important. It's because it's supporting the other.
Very important.
So this is a completely different. So you take all the persons, all the different the visions that we have spread out here, and then you find arrange them here so they line up in a plan. Right? And you never discuss what is most important. But you find a plan so that the ones who have a project that is not the first in line, that they feel the solidarity, that, okay, we work on another aim, because our aim is coming later. Not because it's less important, but because this one has to go first. Right? So it's very much about keeping everybody in, and then we create an aim, and then we create a discussion here, what is the aim? And then we'll find that the singular aim, some of them is not about sequence, some is about distribution of labor. So we can create an ashram or an eco-village. We'll say we need a garden group, we need a kitchen group, we need some, and they will have each an aim. So here we have one group. Let's say this is the garden group. So we define an aim here. And they will maybe have a garden for some kinds of vegetables and some kinds of other kinds of vegetables. And then they will have a chainsaw group and they will have some other group. That's up to them. Right? So every time we create a new level of aims, we just create another group. In this way we get in an organization with lots of groups, but all of them know what they're working on. And if they don't want to work in this group, then they have to go in another group. Instead of being disagree about what the group is going to do. And then this structure is changed when we have the system here of I just go back. We have the level of aims, and then we change that into a group structure. And this is the basic structure of a sociocratic organization. We have the general circle, which is the circle who is dealing with the overall aims. What are we doing here together in this organization? And we don't do all the detailed discussions because they are put out in other circles. We have a kitchen circle, we have an agricultural circle, we have vegetables, and we have chicken here in this one. And here comes the double link thing, is that the circles are always created. So when the general circle creates a kitchen circle, they say we want to make a kitchen circle. We define this is happening in the kitchen. They have this job to do to make the food for us, to buy the food, and to get rid of the waste. And we make a whole line of the things that the kitchen group is supposed to do. And we say, if they do this, we don't care how they do it. This is not our part to discuss in this group. They have to do that themselves, as long as they comply with the aims. So we only decide the aims, and then we choose a person to be the so-called operational leader. He's supposed to be the person who always remembers why do we have a kitchen. Right? And then when the group is created, they elect a person who's a representative. And his job is to go into the general circle as a representative and always remind the general circle that we have a kitchen. You see that? And the decision process is equal. So the representative that goes into the general circle comes in with the same power of consent as everybody else there. Which means that we get a system where the aims have a hierarchy and the persons don't. You have to start somewhere. So this would, in a normal organization, start up with a board. And they will have some other circles. And then these other circles will put up a representative in the circle, in the board. Which is quite interesting because if you look into the Danish or most European or modern countries' legislation about, for instance, workers' representation, they say that workers have to have some kind of representation in the boards, some kind of being there or control or something, observation stages maybe. But in Holland, where this system has been practiced since the 60s, they have actually an exclusion paragraph so that sociocratic organizations don't have to follow the rules because they have a system that's better. They don't have to do it the normal way because the normal way is not as good as the one they're doing. And so in Holland, this is actually quite serious. It's just not some little quirk theory. Right, we go on here, and I'll just say, now we take the decision part. Consent decision has a limited time frame. I said an expiry date, like with food. And this is a date for feedback. And then the decision also has the evaluation criteria. So we say we would make this decision. For instance, if we say we make a kitchen group, and then we say we want it to have these and this and these aims. And these are the things that we will evaluate the group on. We will not discuss any kinds of problems in the group. Some of the evaluation in the kitchen group is for the kitchen group alone. They can do that themselves. What we are doing is evaluating on the criteria we set when we made it. And it's very important because if the general circle makes a bad design of the kitchen group and the kitchen group doesn't work, and you can say, well, it's because you are messing up and you don't do blah, blah, blah. Say, well, you gave us this very bad defined task. How can you expect us to do badly? It's not our responsibility. Your responsibility was to define a task. So this evaluation of what went wrong leaves some responsibility in the general circle. We have to make clear aims, and if it doesn't work, then what we can do is adjust the aims. We can't interfere with the kitchen group's work. As long as they know their aim and they're working on it, they're doing their job. You see that? Because this takes a lot of the personal discussions and the chaos discussions about who's discussing what and who's evaluating what. This makes it completely clear. And then another thing is different from consensus is we don't ask for consensus or consent, we ask for objections. So the idea is to present a proposal, tell you people why I think this is a good idea, and then ask if anybody have any objections. And the understanding of the objection is different as in consensus, because in consensus you can talk about blocking. You don't do that in sociocracy. You say an objection is a contribution to an improvement of the proposal. You can't block it, but you can, what do you call it, for a time, shortly?
Postpone? Postpone?
Hold it.
You can hold it. You can hold it while it is improved. And if the group doesn't manage to improve it so it can go on, then you can postpone it to one next meeting. And if you can't do it there either, then you put it to the general, to the circle about you. Because then they'll have to define something about the aims. Typically, if you can't agree on something, it's because you don't have a clear aim. And you say, well, if we can't find it out, then it's because our aim is not clear. So the process doesn't stop because somebody has an objection that isn't resolved. It is taken to the next meeting and then taken to another circle. You can also make a sub-circle. You can make a group that is doing all the work to create a better proposal, like a daughter circle. So we ask for objections, not for consensus, and we ask for arguments.